This is so much better.
That's my story in a nutshell, along with it. But you
All right, if anyone needs, this is the same handout from last week, but we only made it partway through. And those of you who are watching via live stream, Dave's going to show you the images on the screen, so you have a real advantage over us. Welcome, everyone. We'll let others wander in. I'm going to get started because we've got a lot of ground to cover today. I did not make it nearly as far as I wanted to last week. And some of you are aware, because you're going to be going with me, that the next 2 Sundays I'm going to be with the Adventurers group in Ireland. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. Yeah, several from our class are going. It is, yeah, someone's got to do it. But you are in for a treat because Jim Hancock has agreed to teach the next 2 Sundays. And we'll be back on actual Bible lessons as well. So we'll be picking up our, I left that upstairs. We'll be picking up our red letter. I have the verses for you, Dave, but I had them laid out to bring down here. Anyhow, that's what we'll be doing the next 2 Sundays. So I'm going to try to wrap this up today with our study of art. And welcome back, guys.
Yay!
You doing too much worse for the wear?
Sorry.
All good? As we get started, do you need to say anything more about the Ryan connection?
Just, we had a great group Tuesday night.
Are there more of these?
Speak louder.
Okay. I have realized that asking someone to host a dinner in their house is a lot, especially the fact that, are you vegan? Are you vegetarian? Are you gluten-free? What else are you allergic to? So we're now looking for one person to host a home, and Hart has already volunteered that, provided our dates work in July. So if somebody brings a small amount of dessert, because we all know everybody's not going to eat it, we're going to go to something easier. Also, homes are easier to put people in a living room than to try to seat 8 to 12 people around a dining room table. So this is one of these that we're learning as we go, and we're finding out what works for our class. And so this is where we are. So it is a fun thing to go and to get the backstory. And our responses to him help prepare him for what comes next.
Yeah.
So we'll just keep updating you and go from there. Thanks, Mark.
Very good. A reminder that the church picnic is this afternoon from 5 to 7. Hope to see all of you there. We're at Flagpole Hill this year. And more information about that in the tapestry section of your worship folder. So, Jim.
The ground is pretty wet.
It's going to be wet?
Sit on the ground.
We got a pavilion, too.
Yeah.
Would you mind to hit the lights while you're there?
Sure.
And Jim, I've already announced that you're blessing us the next 2 weeks with lessons.
Woo!
So everyone's very excited about that.
I'm glad there's another Jim over here.
I know, it's a mystery, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so we're back to art today, and I've got to really make tracks. Did I warn you there's nudity in some of this art? Okay. So just be prepared for mature audiences only in this. All right, this is a piece that is really interesting. It's not a religious piece per se, but I think there's a religious message in it. And this is at the National Gallery in London. It's a Rubens from the early 17th century. And the title of it is Minerva Protects Pax from Mars. So it's based in Greek mythology, right? Pax, or pax, meaning peace in Latin, is represented by the mother here, is in the embodiment of peace. And this is, and the child is Plutus, the god of wealth, and you can read in the notes that you have all this. What's interesting is that this Rubens presented this painting to King Charles I when he was in London negotiating a peace treaty between England and Spain. All right? So this notion of peace was given, and you can't see this detail on this screen, and pardon my graphic description I'm about to give. A male should not be saying what I'm about to say. But what's actually happening here is peace is expressing milk from her breast straight into the child's mouth. Right? Really unusual. But if you think about this whole notion of peace, here we are again with a nursing mother as the representation of peace. I think there's some theology to be unpacked in that. What do you think? Yeah?
And the fact that Minerva is protecting her, it means wisdom is protecting her from war.
Wisdom is protecting her from war. Peace from war. Beautiful. Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. Okay, we got tracks to cover here. Now this one is weird. I'll just say that up front. And you can guess that this is El Greco, perhaps, right? This is Jesus driving the traders from the temple, is the title of it, right? So there's really 3 Bible stories in one right here. The central story is Jesus driving the money changers from the temple. But if you look to the small relief to the left, up here, where is it? Oh, back up in here, right? You'll see an angel expelling Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. You see it?
There's a relief on this painting that's not shown on yours, Mark. If you look at this.
Oh,
look at your
down.
Right there.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right there. That is the angel expelling Adam and Eve from the garden. And if you look to the upper right, you'll see another relief of the sacrifice of Isaac right up in here. All working together in the same painting here. Look at the turbulence. I'm going to blow this up again so you can see a little bit more. Look at the turbulence of that scene again. And what is it with Jesus in pink?
Like me.
Yeah, I mean, that is
Faded red.
faded red. Yeah, it's like it got washed with the reds in the laundry. You know, it's white robe.
Maybe they ran out of it.
Yeah, it's not purple. It's actually pink. It is pink when you see it. Isn't that weird? Yeah, but it really makes Jesus stand out, and it's almost like he's slapping people, you know?
He was mad.
Sort of like that.
He was mad.
It's interesting that El Greco took those other biblical stories and put them in the background of this, ostensibly, I guess, to give us context. Jesus driving the money changers out of the temple reminds him of the sacrifice of Isaac, which is a proper sacrifice, and of Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden because of their misdeeds as well. So, interesting little bit of theological interpretation by the artist. Thoughts on that? Observations, anyone? Yes, ma'am.
Pink at the time of Louis XIV was a very popular color at court. So I don't know if that had a history of being kind of a royal thing, you know, with everybody else in mud and homespun.
Ah, well, very well could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Now, there's a church, right, a famous church right across the street from the National Gallery in London called St. Martin in the Fields. Some of you have been there.
Oh, that's where the orchestra.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. The famous orchestra based there. So this is a sculpture that sits in the portico of that church. So when you walk up to the church from the street side, this is what you see. Word became flesh. And then as you walk around the sculpture, you discover on the other side, that's what you see. It's this baby. It's baby Jesus. Right? So now that's the National Gallery right over there. So we're on the door side of the portico looking toward the National Gallery. And the other two sides look like this. And it's all, I'm going to go back here, it's all from John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. Right? What a wonderful way to depict this story. This was actually given for a millennium celebration. You could read the description here. The artist says, for the millennium, I was commissioned to produce a sculpture to be placed in Trafalgar Square during Christmas prior to the celebrations. It seemed to me that a tiny life-size baby carved from stone in such an enormous environment would be the best way to remind us all of just whose birthday we were celebrating. And that is a 4.5 ton block of Portland stone. It's really remarkable. And the one of the things I liked about it was, from the street side, you don't know what it is. You've got to walk around into the portico of the church to get the message. Yeah. Thoughts? Have any of you seen this sculpture before? Yeah. I just thought it was really fascinating.
How big is it?
It is relatively new. Yeah. Say again?
How big is it?
It's about as, I would say it's 6 or 7 feet tall. It's at least 6 feet tall. Yeah, because I'm 6 feet tall, and I was standing looking sort of straight at baby Jesus. So, on the inside. This is just a little lighter piece. This is by a well-known Parisian artist, Robert Delaunay, and it's of the Eiffel Tower. And I just like the style of it, and I'm not going to belabor this. You can go back and read about that on your own. Now, back to some nudity.
Oh, here we go.
Equal opportunity, male, female, working it all out. So, at the Wilshire in Paris, which is a wonderful smaller museum, it's where the Monet big oval room of water lilies is. There was a special exhibit while we were there with a couple of German artists who were friends and contemporaries in the early 20th century. Franz Mark is this particular artist. He primarily painted animals. And the interesting story between him and the other artists in this exhibit was it was telling the story about how they both were on this cutting edge of German art as young artists, finding the way into modern art out of what had been. And both of them ended up being called into duty for the German army in World War II. I'm sorry, World War I. Yeah, World War I, not II. And both were killed in the line of duty in World War I, cut off. This is one of the few pieces that Franz Mark did that is of humans. And this child, this young boy, is representing a lamb, purity. His idea was the purity personified in the lamb, and here is this child. And I immediately looked at this and it reminded me of those images you've seen of Jesus, the Good Shepherd, with a lamb over his shoulders, right? I wondered, surely the artist had seen those types of things, and was he copying that in this ideal or not? It just was because when I first looked at it, I thought, well, this is some depiction of Jesus, but it's not, right? That was not the idea behind it. And then the whole notion of the innocence lost in the artist losing his own life in war, cut off from beautiful painting evermore, just was a whole sort of overwhelming thing. Thoughts on that? Reactions?
I was thinking it was maybe he was saving the lost. Remember the one lost?
Yeah, the 90 and 9, as they say. Yeah, the old saying goes. That's sort of what I thought it was too, but it's not. It's sort of a rip-off of that. Or a riff on that. A riff off. this is a lovely piece. I'm not going to take much time talking about it because we don't have time. This is a Cezanne, right? Yeah. The boat and the bathers. And what I like about this piece is how this defies every rule of composition you can think of, right? You should never have an object in the center. You should never have objects to the side. And yet this piece works. And why does it work? It works because of the tilt of that sail in the middle. And as I stood and looked at this, I thought, what a difference one little articulation can make in bringing unity to a scene. Because otherwise, you have bathers over here and bathers over here, and nothingness in the middle. Except this thing that seems to divide the whole painting in half. And yet, just the tilt of that sail brings us in. And I thought that was lovely. Okay, we got to move on. This is at one of the galleries in Venice, and it's called The Great Mother, La Grande Madre. A sculptor who was an Italian sculptor named Vianney, who did this in many of our lifetime in 1966, right? I just sort of like the way he portrays the maternal form with the head being sort of womb-like in that. You see that? Isn't that fascinating? Don't you get the idea of a womb there?
Not exactly.
You know? No. Okay. You can bring the horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
It reminds me of, I don't know how many people know that the red balls in the fountain at City Hall are called Madonna and Child. And you have to use your imagination just like you
So at City Hall, there are red balls in the fountain, and they're called Madonna and Child. I did not know that. Okay. Anyone else with an interpretive thought on this piece?
Is that our belly button at the bottom?
I think that's a navel. Yeah.
I'm having a hard time picturing anything. I'm like,
We're going to send you and Mike over here to this
I'm with
side.
Mike on this one.
Okay. All good. This is by Gino Rossi, 1913. And he was one of the early forerunners of modern Italian art. And the story I've given you here tells a bit of his. He was forever changed by being sent into war. Imprisonment and family crises shook his mental balance. He died in 1947 in the San Artemio Asylum, where he had been since 1925. All right? So this was painted before he got to the asylum. But notice the oval shapes in the two figures here. Notice how everything's sort of in ovals. Nothing's rounded in a true circle there. But look how that allows him to show us the all-encompassing embrace of the mother's arms here. Isn't that just a lovely, comforting image? Her arms are unnaturally long in the painting, right? Isn't that beautiful? Impressions, thoughts?
It struck me a little differently. I kind of was a little surprised. It kind of looked like the little one has been decapitated.
Just asleep.
That works.
Snuggled in. Yeah.
That's what it looked like to me. Oh, God.
She does look sad.
Yeah.
I think he probably looks sad.
Tired.
She looks tired.
Yeah, there you go, tired.
All right. Now, I told you we saw Michelangelo's David, which is giant, right? And you've seen photos of that if you haven't seen it in person. Giant. Here is another take on David that is the complete opposite of Michelangelo, right? This statue is maybe 2.5, 3 feet tall. It's a totally different way of looking at it in Venice. You can read about the artist here and some of the things he did. He got into trouble with the fascist government and all that. But what I think about this is, we think of David as this strong figure, and yet the story in the Bible is talking about a child, or an early teen at best. And this crouching position sort of For those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans, it almost looks like Gollum.
That's what I just said.
Right. But there's a lot of vulnerability in that. That's not what we typically see portrayed with David. What do you think?
Yeah.
Another way of thinking about David. Right, here's another view of the same piece.
That's even more vulnerable.
Yeah.
But that
It's
face
very
doesn't
vulnerable.
look like a-
Say again, Don?
That face doesn't look like a child. It looks like an older man.
Yeah, that's why I say it looks like Gollum.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is an interesting depiction and juxtaposition
Is he
within that.
picking up a rock?
Yes, he's picking up a stone.
Oh.
He's picking up a stone. Yeah. And not to be too graphic again, but if you go back to here, he's depicted as a child genitally as well, right? I've probably said enough about that. This is another piece that I just like because it's called The Drinker, and the artist name, wait for this, is Martini. The artist is not the one who created the drink, but it is interesting. What I liked about this piece is it just shows, I think, it reminds us of the importance of water for life. At the very top of the sculpture is the water coming in. An interesting reminder, perhaps.
How big is that one?
That's about 6 feet tall. Yeah, from here to here. Look at the inlaid marble in this museum behind there as well. Right. Yeah, very interesting. This is a stained glass window that I liked, and this is in Venice. It's called Spotted Glass Window. And the thing I like about this is so often we expect stained glass to be cohesive and show a story. And this one sort of causes us to have to throw our eyes a little out of focus and imagine. It's not that there's an image within it, per se, but that if we can imagine the spots and the colors coming together, one of the ways that Jerry McElvin is a newer member here at Wilshire, a poet, taught English and poetry at Richland College for a number of years, and has been helping me on my own poetry. And we were talking about the difference between prose writing and poetry, and he has this wonderful line that I like. He says, if you give a prose writer a bucket of paint and say, go paint that wall green, they're going to take the bucket of paint and they're going to paint every square inch of that wall green. And then they'll come back to you and say, there's a green wall. If you give a poet the same instructions, they're going to take the bucket of green paint and they're going to go, doop, 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 doop. A few spots of green here, they're going to say, there's your green wall. Because poetry causes you to have to imagine the rest. Right? It's not all laid out for you. And that's one of the things I like about this kind of stained glass. It can be what you want it to be.
Mark, if you'll look on the far right side, it looks like there's 3 crosses there.
It does. Yes. See what you can find in there? Interesting, right? Okay, moving on. This is an unusual piece of marble. Right? The title of this piece is The Mother of Christianity. And it was done by a sculptor named Adolfo Wilt in 1917. And he's known for really complex symbolism, as you can tell. So this is really detailed. I tried to research this and find out who are these 3 figures, why are there 3, and why are they so creepy?
And why are 2 banded together and not the...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is it like 3 of the gospel writers? Is it 3 of the apostles? I don't know. But whatever, look at the umbilical cord sort of coming through and becoming the vine with grapes. Do you see that? And so the mother of Christianity here has the seeds of the church growing in these figures within her that are nourished by the vine.
Could it be the Trinity?
Well, it could be. Yeah, we don't know. At least I couldn't figure it out. But I thought it was an interesting depiction to think, because so often we only think of Mary as birthing Jesus. But I think what the artist is wanting us to think of is Mary birthing a larger movement embodied in Jesus that involves us. So we place ourselves there in a way. Same artist did this piece.
Oh my goodness, that's scary.
And this is called Mask of Pain. I think it probably speaks for itself.
When was that done?
1909. So before World War I. Yeah. All right, this is just a fun piece. Do you know about the infinite monkey theorem? Infinite monkeys theorem says that a monkey hitting keys at random on a typewriter keyboard for an infinite amount of time could produce complete works of William Shakespeare. If you give a monkey enough time, it's a crazy theorem. This piece is called Infinity of Typewriters plus Infinity of Monkeys plus Infinity of Time equals Hamlet.
Who came up with that theory?
I don't know. I don't remember the origin of it. This is just sort of fun, right? To break things up a bit. Okay, these are out of order now. This is where there's one of these that it would not do in the right order. I'm going to have to pass that for just a moment. Yes, okay. Look at this piece. I'm going to blow it up so you can see a bit more. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Let's do it like that. You can tell this is called Visitation. This is Mary and Elizabeth. Look at the expression on Elizabeth's face as she visits Mary. Look at her stance, how she sort of slightly bows in amazement at what's happening. If you think about that visitation story from the Gospels, this really, I think, beautifully illustrates that. And look at of course, Mary's portrayed as the epitome of calm in this, right? I like the composition. I like the detail.
Yeah, is that carved?
It is carved marble. Yeah, and it hangs on the wall. Yeah, it's
I think Elizabeth looked like a man in that. I
does
thought this was going to be Nicodemus. I don't know why.
Yeah, she does look a little
They
manly there.
guess they're trying to make Mary look super womanly and angelic or something.
Yeah, well, she's ostensibly older,
Yeah.
right?
That happens when you get older.
Here. This is the same artist. Canova is the artist.
Is that Joseph?
This is called Creation of Man. So this is Adam. Now, what's really interesting to me about this piece is we see here Adam fully formed in the creation, and the artist has chosen to depict God's touch on Adam, not in forming him out of clay, but in laying hands on his head. Now, that's a different way of thinking about creation, particularly with what we now know about the evolution of humans, right? And we ask this question, what does it mean to be human, right? One of the answers is to have the spirit of knowledge, or the Spirit of God within us, and to be knowledgeable of that. And here is God coming, sort of like that, right? To lay hands on Adam and give him life. What do you think about that?
I thought about giving him a soul.
So it could be, here's the soul, right? Yeah, I like that idea. What else do you think about it?
I think God has really curly hair.
Yeah, naturally curly hair.
He and Adam both.
Yeah,
Maybe everybody did, but
I guess that's the thing.
I can't. That was just the two of them, so.
Yeah, yeah. The genetics haven't gotten messed up yet on that. Okay. This is back up on your sheet. I like this. This is just a lion. Just a lion. Yeah. Guarding an entrance in this museum in Venice. What's fascinating to me is about the apparent peacefulness of this mighty animal, right, that can give you a false impression. right? Yeah, it's like, is that lion really asleep?
He's got curly hair too.
Yeah, probably counts. Now, there's actually two of them facing each other on opposite sides of this doorway, but I just showed you one. This is a piece, I'm out of order here, it did not let me do this right. This is from the Pantheon in Rome. And within the Pantheon, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, there are stations of the cross around. This is just some old ancient woodwork that's above each one of the stations, and I like the depiction of the cross and the weathered look of it. It's sort of the old rugged cross.
That whole thing is done out of wood?
It's done out of wood. Yeah. Did y'all go to the Pantheon?
We walked right by it.
Right by it, yep.
Yep. Now, okay, I gotta blow this up. This is one of my very favorite pieces here. It's called The Healing of the Possessed Man. And y'all, this is a marble relief that hangs on the wall.
Wow.
It is enormous, and what you see here, I'm going to show you, there's some detail in it. It's like you've taken construction paper and stacked it up, you know, to make a relief. So there really is space behind those things. It's like thin sheets of marble with space along. I mean, it is.
So it really is three-dimensional.
It really is three-dimensional, right? Now, to go back to the larger view on this, what I think is fascinating about this whole piece, again, look at the way the whole thing drives toward the healing happening right here in the middle. But what we see most of all is all the people gathered around. Jesus and the person he's healing are some of the smallest figures in there. He's not depicted this with them up front and the crowd in the back, but with the crowd up front and the healing happening back here, which gives it a feeling of community. This is happening in a large crowd. I don't know, somehow I found some comfort in that. What do you think? Donna?
Well, it reminds me that I'm part of the crowd. I'm looking on too, because I'm in the back looking
That's right.
up
That's
front.
our perspective on
Yeah.
this. And the crowd helps us focus on what's going on here because of that line of sight that's happening there. It's great composition. Someone else? All right, there's that. Oh, now, back to violence. We've got nudity and violence in the art I'm showing you. This is Cain and Abel. Now, the reason I chose this painting to show you is a couple of things. One, again, if you look at the composition here, you see sort of the way this moves around, right? Your eye is drawn around in a circle like this. Look at the angle happening here.
What is that? Is
It's
that
an animal.
Is it dead?
I don't know if it's dead or alive. Look at Abel's vulnerability. Not only is he completely naked, he is pinned on the ground and helpless. And this, to me, portrays the extreme violence of this Bible story in a new way that we often sort of sugarcoat. Yeah, Cain killed Abel. Right? I think we've got to be reminded this is an act of extreme violence happening here. And look at that dagger up there. Look how intentional this is. He's ambushed in this. And I think, again, we have a tendency to sort of clean up Bible stories. But this is one we need to see to understand the true meaning of it all. What are your thoughts on this piece? Comments?
Yeah, I can see where it's very intentional. For me, I can just see where that dagger's going to go. And
it's beautifully done, isn't it? In a violent sort of way.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking with the thirds, what you said last week.
Yes.
Because it's definitely actions in the one.
It definitely follows the rule of thirds. Yeah.
And then you think that they're brothers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Moving on. This piece is of an unknown date. It's called Christ at the Column. And that's just simply because there's a column back there. He's apparently, he may be tied to it or whatever. A couple of things interesting to me about this piece. One, again, Jesus has beautiful locks of hair.
Yes, and they're perfectly. I was thinking that's how a girl would fix it for prom. And he's like been beaten and all this stuff in his hair. Still, I mean, seriously,
Yeah,
it's
right.
perfect ringlets.
Well coiffed Jesus, right here.
I thought what it actually looked like.
So, what's interesting to me is that he has a rope tied around his neck that to our eyes looks like a noose. It probably really wasn't a noose in its intention, I don't think. It probably is indicating that he's been tied to this column. Right?
Because his hands are kind of behind his back.
But here's how our culture allows us to interpret art in a new way, because in American history, we think of a noose. You see rope like that, it is a noose. And this immediately made me connect to a traditional interpretation of the crucifixion in the American South, where it's called the lynching tree. Where what happened to Jesus is compared to a lynching, right? That couldn't have been, I don't think, this artist's intention, but yet we have the eyes of our time to see this interpreted in a new way. Look at that look on Jesus' face. I mean, that would break your heart, wouldn't it? Just really, really amazing. What else strikes you about this piece? What comments? Different way to look at Jesus.
Does he have the crown of thorns on him?
That's the crown of thorns. Mm-hmm. A very neat and tidy crown of thorns, I would add.
Same one you can now find in Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's the one that must have been evacuated
Exactly.
from Notre Dame. No blood.
Yeah, that's unrealistic because his face is totally still pure.
Yeah, he's cleaned
There's
up,
no
too.
way he could have been like that.
The hairdresser did that, probably. You're the stylist. Okay. Now, this is a crazy piece. You can't even fully comprehend it here. It needs to be, this is like a floor-to-ceiling piece. This is an enormous, enormous piece. It's called The Crucifixion and Apotheosis of the 10,000 Martyrs of Mount Ararat.
Wow.
And I had to go look this up because I did not know this story, but it's interesting. And this is Carpaccio is the artist here. According to a medieval legend, 10,000 Roman soldiers converted to Christianity, led by St. Acacius, and then were crucified on Mount Ararat. Remember Mount Ararat from Noah, right? In Armenia, by order of the Roman emperor. The story is attributed to the 9th century scholar Anastasius Bibliocarius, and despite being a legend without verification, the event was a popular story to tell in the Renaissance art, and it's illustrated by this piece, and also by the German artist Albrecht Dürer, who I believe we have some of his work out here in the gallery exhibit right now. And his piece, we don't have that one, it's called The Martyrdom of the 10,000. Had y'all heard that story before? That legend? So it was really popular to paint this and illustrate it during the Renaissance. And there's just dead bodies everywhere in this. This is like, Where's Waldo kind of art, okay? Now, again, back to some nudity. This is Salvador Dali. And this piece hangs in the Vatican museums. Now, what's interesting to me is those of you who've been to the Vatican will know that almost all the statues have fig leaves on them now, thanks to Pope Urban something or other. I mentioned that before.
His name is Urban?
There was a Pope Urban, yeah, who sort of wanted to cover up all of the male parts below, but in
That must have
paintings.
been because he was living in sin, kind of like when Adam and Eve
Yeah, I don't know.
sinned, and then all of a sudden they realized they were naked.
Something like that. This is called the Annunciation, the announcement. It was actually this was not this was a study for a larger piece. I mean, who knew that Salvador Dali did work for the Vatican? Right? It just mind blowing. So he made a larger piece called the Ecumenical Council that was dedicated to the Second Vatican Council. What? Yeah, this is just one part of this, and you can read about that. it's just an unusual representation, I think, of the Annunciation.
Mary looks like she's dressed in Spanish clothing.
She looks like an astronaut.
Yeah, she looks like an astronaut. And Gabriel, I mean, we don't often see angels naked like that. That's a whole different way of looking at this.
Who's the person is that another angel holding the cross over?
Down on the left, yeah.
On the bottom left?
To the cross.
I don't know.
Who's naked, the angels?
That's a naked angel.
It seems weird because it doesn't seem like the angel should be covering his face.
they're not
He
supposed
should be
to
the
be
one,
male
other
or
people
female.
covering their faces from the
Yeah.
face.
Again, Salvador Dali. Right. Go.
But he does have nice legs.
He does have nice legs. Very muscular. This is another Dali, and I actually like this one even better. This is from 1954. It's Crucifixion. And it was a study for a piece that is preserved in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. That's known as Corpus Hypercubicus, because of the cube symbolizing the perfection of divine proportion. And that's, see, Jesus is holding things in his hands there. You also see within this painting, it's not as obvious on here, several surreal things in the atmosphere. A rod with which the soldiers struck Christ, and the scepter. There's a lance in there. But what's really most fascinating to me about this piece is it's a crucifixion without a cross. There is no cross there.
But you know exactly what's happening.
But you know exactly what's happening. You don't have to have the cross. Now that's something to think about, right?
To me, it also kind of seems like he's ascending.
He's ascending. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
beam me up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Kathy.
Has he always had on that jock strap?
That's for modesty, I suppose. Yes.
He looks like Leonardo's Vitruvian Man.
In a way, you can sort of see, Leonardo's Vitruvian Man. You can see a connection there. You know, that's this guy. Yeah. Interesting piece.
I wonder what he's holding. Especially
Oh, those are the nails are his hands.
Well, I think he's holding these cubes that it talks about in the description I gave you.
Oh, okay.
Symbolizing the perfection of divine
And then it's weird
proportion.
because that woman's kind of like ghostly, but the Roman soldier is very clear.
Right.
I guess that's a woman. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it is a surreal background. Right. Okay, I got to move on. This is a Chagall piece. By the way, in September we're having Georgia's 30th anniversary banquet over at Temple Emmanuel. And if you've not been over to Temple lately, they've done a huge renovation project. It's really beautiful. But right outside the room where we're going to be having the banquet, they've got about 15 Chagall originals.
Oh my goodness, really?
So they're amazing. Right? It's like, oh, here's a wall of Chagalls. So I think most of you are probably aware that Mark Chagall is Jewish, right? This was from 1956, and this Jewish artist piece hangs in the Vatican. Okay, this is where we saw it. And Chagall was fascinated with the crucifixion and painted the crucifixion over and over and over again. And here's what he said. For me, so not a Christian, right? For me, Christ has always symbolized the true type of the Jewish martyr. That is how I understood him in 1908 when I used this figure for the first time. He was under the influence of the pogroms. Then I painted and drew him in pictures about ghettos, surrounded by Jewish troubles, by Jewish mothers, running terrified with little children in their arms. And in this case, look at the red everywhere. It's just the blood is running throughout this painting. Isn't that fascinating? Thoughts that you have on this? Let me take it back down so you can see the full thing in scope.
The color depicts violence.
Yeah, it's like the sunset, blood sunset. The only figure who's not covered by red in this painting is Jesus, who's spotless.
P-I-E-T-A, what is that exactly?
P-I-E-T-A, pietà?
Pietà.
Pietà.
What does it mean?
Well, so mother and child, like Mary, the big piece in St. Peter's Cathedral.
The mother
It's
child.
the mother. It's called the Pietà.
Is that supposed to be Mary behind him?
I think so.
Mary.
Okay.
So it's just like after he's been beaten before they
So
kill
it's
him, or just
taken down from
off
the cross. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, taken down from the cross.
The thing about the red too is that it speaks of anguish.
Yeah, Caroline, the red speaks of anguish, anger, despair. I mean, the whole thing does not scream happy, right? You know something bad's going on in there. Here's another one of my favorites. I know I have a lot of favorites out of this. This is a Madonna, sculpted in 1956. This is also at the Vatican. This is a very large piece there. And it was commissioned by a Catholic priest in the mid-1950s. And he envisioned a mass of stone emerging from the earth like a cloud in which the face clearly inspires the maternal presence. And this says something about boundaries, too, because what we see here that's very similar to... Did we talk about Michelangelo's Prisoners yet, or is that coming?
No, not yet.
Oh, yeah. In a moment, we get to one of my all-time favorites. And it's the same idea. You see her sort of not pure, not smooth, but still sort of shaking off the earth from everything. What do you see in this?
Who's it supposed to be?
This is supposed to be Mary.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a Madonna. Okay, moving on. This is actually, it looks like an older piece, but it's not. It's from 1965. It's at the Vatican. It's called Jesus Calming the Storm. It's a sculpture, not a painting. It's actually 3D here. What I think is fascinating about this is look how large Jesus is compared to everyone else in the back of the boat. They are all cowering in fear back here in this part of the boat. And here's Jesus up here. And whether intentional or unintentional, the way the shape goes, it's almost like Jesus is holding up a big umbrella over them. See that protection? That shield? I think that's unintentional, but the image comes across. But nonetheless, his presence there really, it looks like he is.
Yeah, he does. He knows he can stop the storm.
They're cowering in the moment with what they know. Jesus knows more than they know. Well said. Okay, I'm just going to show you some examples of floor tiles that I photographed at the Vatican museums. Often we walk over mosaics like this and don't pay attention to them. There's beautiful art there as well. Look at that pattern. In that, there's another one. Spectacular work here. And one more, you can see that ancient imagery in there as well. Okay, now, let me blow this up. Back to Michelangelo. So we don't have the right part. Oh, I do. Okay, this is one part. So, Sistine Chapel, you have a couple of pieces. One of them is called The Last Judgment that Michelangelo did. The guide we had at the Vatican Museum called Michelangelo Mike. Reference him so much. And the last two is this one right here. You see that? This is Michelangelo's depiction of himself.
Can you blow it up so we a little bit more?
I think that's all it's going to let me do.
Okay.
It's like he's coming out of his skin in that, right? This is the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew, but it has Michelangelo's face on it, hanging between heaven and hell. The story behind this goes that Michelangelo had so many doubts about his own salvation and his own standing that he could not determine whether he would be in heaven or in hell. part of it had to do with his life and his sexuality, but part of it just had to do with his own doubts as well. Interesting way to portray yourself. Lower in the painting, there's a bishop who was at Vatican who he didn't like. He portrayed a really bad life. Okay, now this is a series of 4 sculptures I want to show you. At the Accademia in Florence, which is where the large statue of the David, Michelangelo's David, is. On the way to the David, you pass by these 4 sculptures. Have any of you seen the prisoners there? Yeah, a few of you. So the prisoners were found after Michelangelo's death and were thought to be unfinished works. And then modern scholarship is saying actually he probably intended them to be this way because one of his philosophies of sculpting was that the marble needed to tell the story and you needed to find the story within the marble and bring it out rather than imposing a story or figure on the marble, on the stone. And what we have in all 4 of these, they're called the prisoners because they're breaking free of the marble they're being created out of. So here's one of them. Here's another. Here's another. And here's another. All 4 different characters, different moments of sort of being made. And if you ask me what's your favorite piece of art you saw on your trip, it would be this piece, these 4. And the reason is, I think it's just a beautiful illustration of how we're all struggling to break free of whatever it is that binds us and holds us down. And he captured that because we may feel like we have a stone on top of our head that is pushing us down, and yet we're struggling, we're trying to come out, right? It's not just that we're butterflies trying to come out of a cocoon. We're butterflies trying to come out of a cocoon with a tree on top of us. Right? This is the way I think we experience life sometimes. What do you think? Thoughts? Okay, I got to move really quickly. Youth choir singing today, so we're good, right? With our choir folks. This is Adoration of the Child. This is at the Uffizi Gallery. What I liked about this is the way the light is used. Look at and all the lights emanating from baby Jesus is like reflecting off that white blanket. Jesus, the light of the world. You can go to town on that. This is a piece that's called, one of these is called Fortitude, but the larger series is a series on the virtues. And this is at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. The particular one that I'll show you here is on Fortitude, and it's Botticelli, which is really one of his most seminal works. But all the virtues depicted in different characters there. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. Here's another Annunciation. This is a sculpture. A different way of looking at that. Here is, at first I thought this was baptism. No, this is dead Jesus. They're taking him down and caring for him. You can read about it. This is on the cover of our worship folder today. This is an Armenian funeral stele that is ancient. There's another depiction of David. So we've had, I didn't show it, you big David, little bitty David, medium-sized David. Right? Now, very quickly, this is another fascinating piece that you can read about here. This is called Equality in Death. Equality in Death. And it's this artist's first major painting when he was just 23. And it was for submission to this salon that he wanted to get into. And it's the angel of death covering the body of a young man with a shroud. And it sort of gives a warning. On the preparatory drawing he did for this painting, he wrote, "Equality, when the angel of death covers you with its shroud, your life will have been meaningless if you have not done some good on earth. It's just a different depiction of death in that scene. This is Rodin. It's at the gates of hell. The thinker, by the way, is right there in this. This is a giant. This is like 10 or 12 feet tall, and you can read about it here. I don't have time to go into it right now. This is Beethoven. I liked him. This is the last piece on our list, and this is a sculpture. You heard me talk, wax on and on about the cathedral in Chester, England, that I liked so much. This is the cloister that we saw the inside of 3 weeks ago with what I showed you. There's a courtyard in the middle with a pond, and this sculpture that is called the Water of Life. And what it's depicting is Jesus with the woman at the well, where Jesus says, I have water you know not of. I'm the water of life. And look at this sort of symbiotic relationship they have. And there's water flowing through this basin, right? So it's a fountain of sorts, but very focused. And look at
how they're connected.
The interconnectedness of it, right? It's a little weird on one hand, but it's probably one of the most popular things there for people to see because it just gives you a different vision of the. And it's like she's looking into the bowl of water, saying, "What is this? Right? What is this?" Thoughts on that? Do you like that?
She's the one standing over him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Jesus, I believe.
No, you're probably right. I just thought it would be Jesus giving to her.
Because he asked her for water. Yeah. John Eric.
So did you intend to put this whole emphasis on art while you were over there? Or
No.
not? Okay.
My habit, anywhere I travel, I go to art museums a lot, is I always photograph the stuff I like. And when we got back from this trip, I realized I had hundreds of photos of art that I liked. So the trick, by the way, is you photograph the art and the tag simultaneously so you can remember what it is. And then I can go back through and do that. So what you've seen today are 66, in the last 2 weeks, are 66 pieces among the stuff that we saw that I really did like, that I thought had some message to it. Thanks for your indulgence. I hope this is
Wonderful, Mark. Baby, for what the mother Christianity. And you can find anything on
Yeah, very good. So a reminder, next week Jim is going to be back in our study on red letter words of Jesus in the Bible. And we look forward to seeing you then 2 weeks after that when we're back from Ireland. Thanks to our live stream folks. We'll say goodbye to you. We're so glad that you joined us in Discovery class via live stream today. And we hope that you'll join us every Sunday when you're available. If it's possible for you to join us in person, we would love to meet you as well. We meet every Sunday morning, about 9:45, 9:50, in the parlor at Wilshire Baptist Church, 4316 Abrams Road here in Dallas. If you'd like to know more about Wilshire, visit our website at wilshirebc.org, or also check out our YouTube channel at Wilshire BC on YouTube.